My background is not video game. I joined studio in 2013 when they already have been working on the project for 2 years. But I did have a corporate finance background, valuations, M&A transactions. I was a CEO of a large railway freight service company called AWT. And with this background, I started in a video game industry, which was quite unusual. I came to the company from the company of our investor at that time. So let's focus on the numbers today, or some advices how to increase the value of the company. When Pavel invited me, he asked me not to do any post-mortem about Kingdom Come because everyone knows that story already, and we have been presenting this, I think, last year, I guess. But I think it's very important to do a super quick one because when explaining first couple of years of Warhorse, I will present on that a few tips or advices how to increase the value of the company. So we started in 2011 with development, and by 2013 there was a prototype. I think that it's quite clear to everyone here what the prototype is. Indeed, and then we presented it over 2 years on various conferences like GDC, Gamescom, E3. And we heard it's too magic, it's no magic, it's too realistic, so sorry, no. It's very nice, but we will not invest. Fortunately, we have our investor who supported us. However, even he had a doubt whether two guys, Dan and Martin, who claims that this will be super, and some other guys in LA and San Francisco says, well, it's super, but thank you. But who is right? So we then went to Kickstarter, and we have got pledges from 35,000 people, and become one of the most successful projects of 2014. Why I'm saying this? That gave us little of room for breath for next year, and we are now here in 2015, and we already have a quite large chunk of the game and still have no publisher, which might seem like okay, so we are going against the wall without publisher, so we are almost in the middle of the development and still don't have anyone. It was actually our strategy to not have anyone at that time. But we still needed someone, because indeed at that time in 2015-16, the distribution looked slightly different compared to these days. Still, retail was very important, and actually it still is in these days. And digital distribution was already there, indeed. But the possibility or the options to do self-publishing was not as high, so we still needed publisher. And finally, in 2016, we nailed a deal with Koch Media, Deep Silver, and the most important point on that slide here is that it was a conversation of equals, between equals. So we have been well-funded. They had a competence, we had a certain competence, so it was not like that we would be begging for the money. If we were begging for the money, for sure we would end up in a completely different deal. So when asked for pledging IP rights or signing the deal for the next game, whatever the game will be, we said no, we want to have a freedom for anything else in future what we will be doing. So let's talk only about the Kingdom Come. And it was not an easy discussion with them because indeed, they were much more powerful than us. So they indeed wanted our IP rights and rights for the next game. And we signed the deal in 2016 after 5 years of financing by equity and crowdfunding. What actually we have financed by that, So 65% was went to the people. So this is basically how the development P&L looks like of a typical developer during the development phase. Most of your cost is people. Everything else is, compared to the people, peanuts, no matter how much you pay for the offices or for hardware, software, music, etc. Marketing here, 5%, it's only a pre-release marketing. We are not talking the marketing after release, media, etc., etc. This is only like Gamescom, E3, and most before release, like basically traveling with the backpacks and presenting ourselves to big guys. In these days, indeed, the cost of people are much higher, so for our next game, we expect that 75 to actually maybe even 80% will be spent on the team. Here is how much time did it take? It took 18.5 thousand man weeks over the 6 years. Yes, we were, the development of Kingdom Come was very, very long. But if you recalculated it in a let's say normalized size of a team which is similar to what we have today, it was 3.5 years. These 18.5 man weeks. Why I'm saying this? About 60% of our costs were spent before we signed the deal with the publisher, and only 40% was after. Or only, it's still a lot, but we actually, by the time we signed the deal with publisher, we already had about 60% of the game done. If simplifying a little bit, but that's about it. And here comes my advice number 1 for the value creation. If you talk to anyone about supporting your project, giving you some additional financing or extra financing, if you can, not always you can, but if you can, don't give up your IP rights and don't grant any rights of first refusal. Sometimes it's possible, sometimes not, but if possible, keep it in your hands. And you increase the value, or at least your negotiation power in future. My advice number 2 is, create as much of the game as possible without someone else's money. If you can do it, and if you can handle the situation for 1, 2, 3 years, then you have a good prototype, you have a vertical slice, you have something more tangible in your hands, and then indeed your negotiation power is much better than if you have just the idea and you're at the very beginning of the development and you start looking for money, then you will end up with having a 5-10% stake in your company and someone else having 90%. Example, but that easily may happen. Now let's talk about the supply chain, how the economics of the gaming industry looks, on a distribution side. This is how it looks, so you are a developer and your customer is over there. And there is a number of other people in between you and the gamer. Platform holder, publisher, distributor, and these are the guys you need to talk to. So you have a Steam, you have a Microsoft, you have a Sony, you have a GOG, now you also have an Epic. You also have a GameStop, Walmart. It's almost impossible to talk to these people. You eventually may talk to Alza in Czech Republic, but it's very difficult to get direct contact or lead direct negotiation with the big retailers in US. And for that, you need a publisher. You also need a publisher for some platform like Microsoft and Sony. It's very difficult for indie developer to develop a direct or to agree a direct publishing deal with Microsoft and Sony. For that, having a publisher is a benefit. On the other hand, you can self-publish on Steam, you can self-publish on GOG, and you can definitely self-publish on Epic. This is in Czech. Sorry for those who don't speak Czech, but I didn't want to translate it because this is a quote from the internet, from some article shortly after we released the Kingdom Come. Well, it's partially correct, but basically all the assumptions are not correct. The only approximately correct assumption is that 5 million units would most likely generate 3.1 billion Czech crowns. But otherwise, indeed, we didn't sell 5 million. It's not so easy to sell more than 1 million units. Every game which sells more than 1 million units is actually already a very successful game. And simple multiplying 5 million by 2 and then 3 billions by 2, so you have a 6 billions, it simply doesn't make sense. Here this is more realistic picture how it looks like. On an axis here you have quarters, so basically it's kind of 3 years. And it's very illustrative. It's not the performance of Kingdom Come. It's, however, inspired by the performance of Kingdom Come. And typically, you will sell about 75% of the game during the first year, and in fact, about half during the first quarter. So it's very simple mathematics. Then once you see your performance during the first quarter, you pretty much know how many units you will sell in total. And indeed, the price of the units of the game after 3 years is completely different to what you can get during the first 3 months. This is a Kingdom Come example how it went. So you see that the performance during the first period is extremely, it's super fast. It goes super fast up and it goes super fast down. And then you have a few next occasions like summer sales on Steam, fall sale on Steam, winter sale on Steam, and indeed, once you have a DLCs, which is very important, if you do the game which can have a DLC, do DLCs because it increases the potential and the shelf life of the game. So who gets what? Now I'm talking about the P&L, but we will get back to the evaluations because this has actually a very important input into our discussion about the valuation and M&A. On the left side, you see digital distribution. On the right side, you see a retail distribution. So basically, in these days, the channels looks like on Steam, you get 70% and Steam takes 30%. And mostly all other the distributors looks like that. Epic is slightly different in these days. While in retail, 40% margin on a retail side, it's something which is like normally required. Then you also need to produce the boxes, which is another, say, 22%. And then and you will end up with having approximately 38%. What it means in real numbers. If you are selling the game for, say, 50 euro, including the VAT, then you will end up, your 70% will end up at about 30 euro, while your 50 euro game will end up for you at 16 euro if you go through retail. And you see here at the bottom that the orange part is developer plus publisher. So once you do a self-publishing, you can get the 70% for you, and it's completely your income. In case the retail deal with publisher, which most likely you will do it, then the 16 euro here is still to be split between developer and publisher. So I don't know, divided by 2, for example, or take 60% of that. Maybe 65, but depends on the deal, but it's not 16 for you for sure. And here comes my value creation advice number 3. Keep as much as the whole supply chain in your hands as you can. What I mean by that, do self-publishing where you can. Build competencies like marketing if you can. On the other hand, some input of experienced people from publisher will help as well. I'm not saying that the publishers would be evils who are not giving you any value. But if you can do it, if you are capable of it, if you have a team, then provided you keep certain competencies in the company, in your studio, then definitely it will increase your the profit you will end up with, and consequently your valuation. Now let's talk about the financing. I was showing this at the University of Economics in Prague, and it's a small quiz indeed. For them it was a little bit more difficult, but I assume that it's a piece of cake for you here. It looks almost the same, but it's not the same. It's one picture is gaming, and the other is gambling. The problem is that when you start talking to banks, for example, and they are in these days super eager to provide some project financing, they will never recognize these two pictures. They will not distinguish these two pictures. Gaming and gambling, it's on a blacklist for them. So we talked to many banks, and they said, very nice, again, like when we were talking to publishers, but they said no, we cannot finance gaming. And when we asked why, they said because it's almost like a gambling and we have it on a blacklist. I don't know, bullshit, but whatever. That this is what it is. So basically, forget the loan. You don't get a loan. So then you will end up in equity, means like a shareholder loan, or you have an investor which is shareholder of your company. You eventually can get a mezzanine finance, which is a kind of loan convertible into equity, provided something very bad happens to your company and it's subordinated to other loans. So it's kind of something between equity and loan. So therefore, eventually, you may get it. Then, publishers' money, prepayment, definitely a source of the financing. And although publishers doesn't own your company, economically quite often they own your company, because the share they take from your revenues is quite large, quite often. So structurally, it's quite similar to equity at the end of the day. And then there's a crowdfunding, and we have been there in 2014, and out of sight, out of mind. I didn't pay so much attention to crowdfunding since then, so I made a dive into this topic again, because I've heard in between that actually it's not what it was, but actually it's still very good. This is like the total performance of Kickstarter, $4.7 billion since Kickstarter started. And when I did it for University of Economics in February, the number of 4.6 was 4.1 or 4.15, something like that. So since then, between February and now, there were 500 millions coming to the projects through Kickstarter. Total backers, it's a pity that I don't have these notes now, because I have these numbers over there, but I remember them. Total backers, 7 million increased by 1.2 million. So another 1.2 million people pledged into the projects. And repeat backers increased since February by 500,000. So, which is, I think, actually very good. I think that the Kickstarter is still a very good platform for financing. How the game looks on Kickstarter. They are the third, they're the third most, the number of projects being financed by the Kickstarter is the third. However, they are on the first place as regards money they collected. So you can see that you can actually finance quite a large games through Kickstarter. And the success rate is not, in the top 5. So only 40% of the projects being financed over the Kickstarter succeeded. On the other hand, the largest rate are around 60%, and I think it's some design projects or theater projects, but super small projects. Overall, when we are talking about the bigger projects, you are around the 40% success rate. And one more thing about the Kickstarter, you can see here that pretty large projects can be financed over the Kickstarter. So don't be afraid, go there. It's a good source of money. And the likelihood that you succeeded is actually reasonably high. Well, in between these projects, games, it's a very big category. So there are projects like this, like pretty crazy ones. Some of them, Exploding Kittens, which is not, I think, the kind of games we are talking here at the GDS. However, there are some other projects, from the video game industry. Shenmue 3 is collected 6.3 million, and they are number 1 in video games, and they are number 5 in total. We were number 4 in 2014, number 4 in total, and number 1 in between games. Now the Kingdom Come is on the 70th place, and we are number 6 in between games. So still one of the largest projects on Kickstarter being financed by Kickstarter. So we talk about the form of financing, and we still need to talk about the price. So if you can get a loan, you most likely will end up at about 5%, but most likely you don't get a loan. Then mezzanine would cost you 12 to 20%, and it actually would be quite cheap. It looks like a very high rate, but if I have a chance to get money which is asking 20% PA at the end of the day, and it's a loan, kind of loan, then it's actually very good. Equity costs you about 20 to 30%, and almost always on a compound basis. And is crowdfunding free? It looks like that it's free because we all think that it's just printing the T-shirts with the logo of the company and giving people the game back once you have it done, but it's not free. It's quite expensive. Here how it looks like. We collected approximately 3.3 million euro in crowdfunding, and just the production of the collector's edition, what this picture shows is that I try to translate the non-financial figures and categories into kind of financial categories like interest rate or something like that, or cost of financing. So what's the cost of crowdfunding? Does that. So we have kind of got a loan from people of 3.3 million euro, and it cost us on a collector's edition production and logistic approximately 300,000 euro, which is say 10%. But also we give to the people, once we finish the projects, the game. And as we discussed before, should people buy the game for for $50 or 50 euros, we ended up with 30 in our pocket. So 70,000 backers, which is these 0.3 million, multiplied by 30, and you have a 2.1 million. So in fact, from one perspective, the cost of the crowdfunding was 73% of the total income or total amount we have got, you know. So assuming indeed that these people would buy the game, you know, which is a little bit, you know, maybe they wouldn't buy the game because they wouldn't like it. But let's assume for this example that all who back the game, if they didn't, and the game still would make it to the market, they would buy. So here it comes, the 73%. Another view on that is that if you recalculate these $300,000 or euros to on a per annum basis that we had this money, or we have been using the money for say 3-4 years, and then we produce collector's edition and spend some money on logistics, and it's kind of interest, then it would be like having the money borrowed for 3.3% on a per annum basis. And we repay the loan with the games in the form of games. So cost of crowdfunding or crowdfunding in general, it's not free source. It's something which you need to repay. And that's my advice number 4. If you can have that, accept that, even though the conditions might be harsh, it always will be the cheapest source of financing. And crowdfunding is a debt, so do repay it, because that's also, if you repay it, and if you are among one of these projects which wouldn't repay, that damages the crowdfunding spirit in a very bad manner indeed. So here's my first summary. So don't give up your IP rights. Create as much as possible without someone else's money. Do as much as you can by yourself and use debt wisely. But all that, we haven't been talking so far about the game itself. All that what I'm saying here assumes that you have a great game. So first of all, have great game. No financial structure will save you. You can. So this is something which is condition precedent. You need to have a great product, because otherwise no one will talk to you anyway. So let's assume that you finish the game is successful, you kind of followed all these advices, so you self-published, or at least you have a very large chunk of the margin from your digital distribution. The first wave of financing came reasonably late after you started the project, so they didn't already spell out you before, and you have actually your company in your hands, and now you are eventually thinking about selling the company. And it's the valuation of the video game studio, it's not very trivial, because this is, let's imagine this is a cash flow of a kind of normal company producing, let's say, tramways for Prague. So you are, let's say, somewhere in the middle here, and you knew what was your cash flow last 5 years, and you most likely will know quite well what's your cash flow for next 5 years. Indeed, it might be growing a little bit because there is some inflation, but overall, this is producing tramways, or say transportation, dopravní podnik in Prague. So 1 million every day, 1 million people every day. They pay some some fee for the tickets, and unless Prague want to grow to 3 million city, they always will be transporting 1 million people a day. So forecasting of these companies is pretty easy, And once the forecasting of the financial performance of these companies is pretty easy, then indeed the valuation of these companies is very easy as well. Basically, you multiply in some way the previous performance, do some check, and you see your next performance. Well, it doesn't work in the gaming industry at all, you know, in a big projects. This is how it looks in the gaming. So you start with a small cost, then you have a little bit higher cost, then you have again a little bit higher cost, and then after 3 years or 4 years, you publish the game. You are successful. Yeah, here you publish the game. Indeed, you need to repay your cost, most likely in some way, or some financing to someone who gave you the financial funds for the first game. And then you start dreaming about your next game. You know your cost now quite well because you ended up here, so most likely you know that you will be spending approximately same, maybe a little bit more in next years. But you don't know exactly whether it's 3 years or 4 years or maybe 5 years. Who knows, you know? After success here, you believe that you will sell twice as much of your new games, but also, you know, the success of the first game doesn't mean automatically, or doesn't say much about the success of the next game, you know? And you can see it in the movie industry. There is a first movie of certain franchise, and then the second movie, is actually very bad. For example, it's the success, simply success. The first success doesn't mean that that automatically you will your next game will succeed. So, but let's imagine that someone would like to buy you here. You are successful. You are approached now, like, okay, we would like to buy your company. So the crucial discussion is indeed about that. This is clear, this is clear, this is clear. So it's mostly about this. And again, I assume here that everyone already likes your game because otherwise they wouldn't approach you here. So it's not like discussion, what if our games do that, they do this, or what if our games do that, So it's like quite clear. The discussion actually is more about the structure, how the industry will look in 3-4 years when your next game will hit the market. Will people be still buying game in the boxes? It's in these days it's like 60% of people are buying digitally, 40% in retail. But what if everything goes over digital channels? Then indeed, the profit in the studio is much higher. How the distribution channels in general will look like. There will be subscription-based models. Will there be more competitors? Like, will Epic, for example, be enough disruptive? Will this change the distribution, the percentages, the revenue splits, for example? And as I said, the subscription-based models may actually change the dynamic of the distribution in a very interesting way. I don't know how, but certainly it will happen. Would I get the proper access to major players? Can I talk to them directly or not? And indeed, out of sight, out of mind. What I mean by this, in fact, once you locked yourself into your studios for next 3 years, for example, and you would say, okay, so I will repeat the model at the beginning, the first model or the first approach, like I will present the game to publishers once again after I have a prototype. Then indeed, they won't remember always your initial success. So it's actually quite good to start rather earlier after after you finish the first game. If you want to exit, indeed, if you want to keep the studio and just keep it, and you want to keep it in your hands, then that's absolutely perfect as well. And here comes my advice number 5. Assess fairly whether the synergies whether synergies which eventually will come are accessible to you anyway, or you get more if you let someone in. You will very often hear when you will be negotiating with potential buyer that they can do this, that, and some zillions of other things for you. But the key question is whether you can do it by yourself as well. If it's your synergy, then it's also your value and your valuation and your benefit, and they should pay for this. If it's something like, we will get you on this platform, and this new platform will generate zillions of new revenues for you, and you know that without them, you would never get on that platform, just an example, it's their value. And indeed, you cannot be asking this value. You can pretend that it's accessible, you can play hard, but after all, it's about the fair assessment, whether it's your contribution for the future or their contribution. And what's yours, it's your value, and what's there, it's their value. Easy. Indeed, giving up certain percentages of your company and, I don't know, being acquired by someone also may bring interesting synergies, like that your game might be, you can spend more time on it, for example, because you will have a bigger freedom, financial cushion, so you can work instead 2 years, maybe 3 or 4 years, and you can develop a better game. Also, another synergies might be that some interchange in between studios, so they have some technologies, or maybe some proprietary technologies which will help you. And it's sometimes better to own a smaller part of the company, which has a higher valuation, than owning 100% of a super small company. Yeah, and that's basically everything what I wanted to share with you in these days. So, technically speaking, it's end of my presentation. However, having being here on the stage, I need to indeed, show this. We are hiring, and should anyone is interested joining Warhorse, you are more than welcome, to talk to us at our booth. In particular, we are seeking for these positions. And if you don't see your position here, and you still would be interested, talk to us anyway. I'm sure that there's a number of different opportunities as well. So thank you very much. And should you have any questions, I'm open to them indeed.
Yeah. Thank you, Martin. Thank you. And if you have some questions, please raise your hand so we can see it and get you the microphone. Questions? Yeah.
So, Martin, would you say that trying to... Does it work? Does it work? Okay, that's good. Martin, would you say that trying to come up with a valuation for a regular premium game company like yourself is basically just a sort of a tug of war, where you try to argue that your next title will be larger and the buying partner will pinpoint the risks and things that you haven't thought about?
Sorry, I didn't understand the word. I don't mean your English, but I mean like the echo or something like that was there.
Sorry
so.
about So when you're trying to come up with a valuation for a company, like you mentioned, with not recurring revenue, so you've got yourself a title in the pipeline, you don't necessarily know how well it's going to sell,
I don't think that this is that discussing with potential investor, it's a kind of Turkish market. It's you shouldn't approach him, or you shouldn't have a discussion which is like, he says 200, you say 100. Okay, so let's make it 150. It's never like that. It's more like that. If you are the first one who says the number, I am ready to sell the company for certain number, for certain valuation, then you need to be very well prepared, and you need to explain in a rather granular way why you think that your number is the number. And you have to have a very good argument for that. For example, in our case, it was not a discussion about the success of the previous game and whether we are able to repeat the success. It was kind of automatic that this team is able to develop a new game, which most likely will be again quite successful, indeed with the caveats that it's not like written in the stone. But it was more discussion really about these topics I just mentioned. So we think that we will be distributing that the 3-4 years down the road, everything will be digital. So if we keep the company by ourselves, we will keep most of the revenues. Second, we didn't give up when we negotiating the Kingdom Come publishing deal. We didn't give up IP rights, and we didn't provide the right of refusal for the next game. So we were completely open to new opportunities. We could have talked to anyone. So from that perspective, we were very like nice, bright, with all the benefits, which is another element. So it was really discussion about the outlook of the industry and where the margin in the supply chain between us and the investor, the new investors, where is the largest margin and who owns the margin. So it was more discussion about how the industry will look like, as I said.
Okay,
Any other question?
Is there another question? All right, I think that's it. Thank you, Martin, again. Thank you very much.
Thank you too. Thank you.